This is Euronews Tonight. Here are your top stories. Stalemate is not an option. The message from Ukrainian President Zelensky, who says his country's lost too many people to cede territory to Russia as both sides battle for control of the east. European Council President Charles Michel accuses Russia of using food supplies as a stealth missile as Ukrainian grain languishes in blocked Black Sea ports, sparking fears of a global food crisis. The British Prime Minister says he wants to get back to business the day after winning a confidence vote, but with his party divided, his time now ticking for Boris Johnson's tenure at number 10.
And here in the Cube, we look at one American doctor who's using TikTok to fight online misinformation about monkeypox.
I'm Helena Humphrey. It is good to have you with us. We start tonight in Ukraine, where the battle for the key city of Severodonetsk in the east is now entering a critical phase. As the fight for control continues, Ukraine says that Russia is sending reinforcements towards the city. Luhansk governor says that the battle on the ground is constantly changing, but the Ukrainian troops are managing to repel attacks. But Russia's defense minister claims its troops have fully liberated residential areas within the city and says that 97% of the Luhansk region is now under Moscow's control. Well, as fierce shelling continues in Kharkiv, President Zelensky has renewed calls to join NATO and says that stalemate is not an option. Well, Moscow is using food as a stealth weapon against developing countries. That is the accusation from the European Council President Charles Michel towards Russia. The West has long accused the Kremlin of blocking grain shipments from Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is slated to visit Turkey tomorrow with the aim of discussing a potential corridor through the Black Sea. But Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, says that Ukraine will have to first demine their ports.
Ukraine must demine the approaches into the ports, which will allow the vessels, after undergoing a check by our military to make sure they don't carry weapons, to enter ports and load up on grain. And then, with our help, if necessary, continue on towards international waters.
Well, tracking this story very closely for us is our international correspondent, Annalise Borges. We can bring her in now. Annalise, good to see you. Quite some contradictory messages here. I think it's fair to say we've got Peskov saying that Russia is ready to unblock the grain. We've got the Russian ambassador to the United Nations storming out after Charles Michel accused Russia of blocking those exports. And then the Russian foreign minister himself, Sergei Lavrov, heading to Turkey tomorrow for talks on the topic. How likely is it, in your assessment, Annalise, that we could see any kind of progress here?
Well, contradictory messages is what we've seen throughout this crisis, isn't it, Helena? Turkey's options are certainly dwindling and narrowing as this particular aspect of the crisis deepens, if you will. Technically and legally, Turkey controls the only access to the Black Sea. That is, of course, the Strait of the Bosphorus, that part of the world there, which is administered by Turkish officials. And at least for now, none of the belligerent parties are allowed to go through it. So technically, no Russian ships, neither Ukrainian ships can go through the Bosphorus and then access the grains and then access international markets through it. Of course, what we're likely to see tomorrow in those talks between the Turkish Foreign Affairs Minister and his Russian counterpart is the negotiation of a green corridor that allows for some ships to go through. But what Moscow is very likely to ask, of course, is that only Russian ships are allowed through the Bosphorus, while Kyiv has been asking, and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly said that it's time for the West to help Ukraine export its grains, to help this blockade end. Of course, we can also see a scenario where other NATO countries demand Turkey that some other ships get involved and go into the Black Sea to get those Ukrainian grains out of there. So it's going to be very interesting to see what Turkey does next and how it plays in terms of these negotiations. Turkey has been a key negotiator in this crisis, or at least has tried to mediate this crisis. The last round of peace talks between Ukrainian And Russian negotiators has taken part in Turkey back in April, and that was the last time they actually talked. We are getting reports that Lavrov is also going to bring about these negotiations, going to bring back up these negotiations with Lavrov, tomorrow, trying to talk about potentially resuming these negotiations. Of course, we're going to have to wait and see whether or not Turkey can actually do something and use that access to the Black Sea as leverage. Helena?
And Annalise, I know you're going to be tracking this one very closely because essentially you've been in Ukraine reporting on the war there and now as international correspondent, potentially seeing a global food crisis. Ukraine and Russia, I mean, they account for around a third of the world's grain supply. So talk to me about the impact of what we could be seeing spiralling from what is happening to the Black Sea ports and then around the world.
Well, the impact is already being felt across the world, from places like Lebanon to Sri Lanka to several African nations. We saw the World Bank predict a jump in food prices by about 37% if the war continues until the end of the year. And we have seen several warnings from the UN, the latest one saying that some 20 hotspots across the world could actually face famine because of the war. As you said, Russia and Ukraine accounted for about 30% of exports of wheat and other grains, and 60% of the sunflower and global supply of sunflower, which is what accounts for a lot of processed foods that we eat across the world. 60% of that ingredient came from Ukraine. So we are likely going to see this actually spiral out of control if those ports are not unblocked. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has warned that 75 million tons of grains could be blocked in Ukraine if this blockade continues by fall. And so this is going to have a trigger effect. Of course, we're talking about these warnings as the last straw, really, of a multitude of crises. The UN has been talking about these multitude of crises that include, for example, climate shocks, but also the fallout effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we are faced with a multitude of crises and this war that is just adding pressure to the food market. We are going to see several countries suffering from it. We are already faced with a spike in prices, and President Volodymyr Zelensky has been using this argument to say that that is how we know that Russia is not only waging a war against Ukraine, but against the entire world. He has also been talking, Helena, about this fatigue that we are seeing in countries around the world that are concerned about this war lasting, and of course this grinding effect of the war in the east. No major gains being reported in the last few weeks. The Ukrainian president has urged countries all around the world not to forget about this conflict because everything now is at stake for his country.
Well, as you say, Annalise, I'm sure I'll be speaking to you from other countries now, feeling the impact, feeling the fallout from this war. Our international correspondent, Annalise Borges, thanks for that. Well, lawmakers in the European Parliament are debating changes to key climate change policies that hope to slash harmful pollution ahead of a key vote on Wednesday. Now, the package hopes to deliver the EU's target of reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by 55%. That's by 2030, down from levels in the 1990s. But officials are divided on whether or not the proposals should go even further, and members of Parliament are deliberating hundreds of amendments that will determine the EU's climate stance. Well, as the bloc looks to cut its dependency on Russian energy, Brussels says that the policies could bring about a move towards more sustainable and locally sourced green energy. Well, breaking this package of laws down for us is our correspondent, Shandor Giros in Strasbourg. He joins us now. Good to see you. Certainly an ambitious set of proposals, and not without controversy either. Why? Walk us through this.
Indeed, there are a lot of controversies in this package, and the European Parliament is working now on the final details before they would approve their own legislation on this, their own view on this. So this package aims to bring down massively the CO2 emissions by the end of this decade. That's a huge task. I'm joined by a Green Party MEP from Finland, Ville Niinistö, to discuss the issue. Welcome to Euronews. First of all, many industrial groups and also some political parties are complaining that the package is too ambitious and it will destroy their businesses. What's your take on this claim?
Well, obviously the backdrop to the situation is that if we don't do climate action enough, then we will have huge costs. So there is no kind of like business as usual scenario. There will be huge cost of climate effects. And when we do this implementation of the climate package, we create jobs in Europe. So this is about being technological leaders in industries, in cars, new electric cars, in land use, how we can produce food more sustainably. So I think this is a big opportunity to European economies when we implement it properly, because the rest of the world will also follow.
Do you think it's a realistic proposal to phase out the production of petrol and diesel engine cars by 2035?
I think the war in Ukraine has shown how fossil fuel powers like Russia use fossil fuels, our dependency on them, to their political gain. So also in investing into sustainable solutions, clean, renewable energy, electricity, we can be energy sovereign in Europe. We can create jobs because those jobs will be based on European energies, and then we can get electrical cars and vehicles that will then lower the costs in the long term for also car users, because the prices will come down when the markets develop, and then we are not dependent on fossil fuel prices. So I think that the question is how to manage the shift. That's the key question, to make it social, to make it also about creating jobs.
So the most controversial proposal to put a carbon tax on families and individuals is off the table, but definitely people have to pay more for energy because this transition will cost. How could the European Union explain it clearly to the citizens that it's worth to do it?
I think the big thing for us to do is to show that with this package we lower the cost of the alternatives. So we will have, instead of being living in houses won't buy gas, we will have heat pumps that will become cheaper, easier to get, and in the long term cheaper. So it's about managing the transition in a way where 10 to 20 years from now people will have better living, better housing, better traffic, better cars with lower emissions and more sustainable costs. It's just that we have to create that pathway and take people on board.
Thanks very much. And now back to studio.
All right, Sándor Zéros there in Strasbourg. Thanks a lot for that. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he wants to draw a line under concerns about his leadership and move his country forward after surviving a vote of confidence by his own party. Now, 211 Conservative MPs backed Johnson in yesterday's ballot, while 148 voted against him. Although immune from further votes of confidence for at least a year, the PM's margin of victory reveals deep divisions within the Tories. While Johnson has been facing calls to resign from both sides of the aisle due to his involvement in illegal gatherings at Downing Street during COVID lockdowns. Well, let's bring in our reporter in London, Tig Enright, for more on this. Good evening to you, Tig. The message from the Prime Minister today was that he wanted to draw a line under all of this, his words there. Can he?
Hi, Helena. Well, he said those words before. He was saying them before the vote and certainly even after the vote. He and his allies talking about now focusing less on what their opponents want them to talk about and focusing on what they say, what they claim is what the people of Britain want them to get on with delivering. One thing, though, that's different in terms of what they're saying is describing a victory of the scale that they enjoyed in this confidence motion as a decisive victory. Cast your mind back 4 years ago when Theresa May faced a similar vote when she was Prime Minister. She won 2/3 of the MPs who cast their votes on that fateful evening. And at that point, many of the allies surrounding Boris Johnson today said that those numbers were grounds for Theresa May to quit at that time. Now, there was one MP who sort of changed his mind to a degree, says he accepted, an MP who voted against Boris Johnson on Monday night, said now he accepts the democratic will of the party. But most of the other opponents say it's simply not business as usual. And, you know, when a controversial policy comes around the corner, and inevitably there will, be it the Northern Ireland Protocol or be it further votes on the controversial policy to send refugees to Rwanda, he'll know that those MPs who voted against him can't necessarily be relied upon to continue supporting him. So we're just waiting, really, in many ways, for legislation perhaps to start failing here. Cast your mind back to the general election of a couple of years ago when Boris Johnson won a majority of the Conservative Party of historic proportions in modern times of around 80. Well, 148 of those MPs voted against him last night. So if they continue to oppose him, he hasn't got a majority anymore.
Yeah, that's the key issue here, isn't it, really, Ty? Because the day after the night before, essentially, what have we learned? And we've woken up today learning that 41% of Boris Johnson's own MPs don't have confidence in him anymore. And that is, as you say, a worse result than that of Theresa May, a worse result than that of John Major, if you cast your mind back significantly. And ultimately, that signalled the unravelling of their tenure. So could this also be the beginning of the end for Johnson?
Yeah, you're quite right to point out the historical precedent there with Theresa May, with John Major, both of which are being talked about quite frequently here as well. Theresa May was gone within 6 months of winning that confidence motion. John Major went on to lose a general election in an historically bad way. And the other thing, as you mentioned in the intro, that this win secures Boris Johnson is immunity, as per the Conservative Party's rules, from further such confidence votes for another 12 months. But just like happened under Theresa May's administration, her opponents at the time started talking about changing those rules, and Boris Johnson's opponents are talking about changing those rules now. The head of the committee warned, the rank and file MP committee warns that was a possibility before the vote. His opponents are continuing to talk about it the day after the vote. Many people focusing here now on the next major milestone in the Conservative Party, which is its annual conference coming up in October of this year. The leader, of course, is supposed to set out priorities for the year ahead and perhaps heading into the next general election. Many of Boris Johnson's opponents hope he'll be gone by then. And whether it's those by-elections which are coming up in a couple of weeks' time, or this inquiry led by MPs into whether Boris Johnson lied to MPs in saying he didn't know about parties held in Downing Street at the height of lockdown, there are plenty of opportunities for him to trip up between now and then.
All right, and tracking all of those for us, our reporter Ty Enright there in Westminster. Ty, good to talk to you. Thank you. Now, former golf world number one Dustin Johnson has resigned from the PGA Tour, allowing him to play in the new Saudi-backed Live Golf Invitational Series. So for more on this, we can go over to our sports reporter, Michael Kern. Michael, good to see you. It was a bit of a surprise announcement, we have to say, for a player who recently reaffirmed their commitment to playing in the PGA Tour. What does this mean for the future of golf, do you think?
Well, I think this week's going to be incredibly interesting when we look at it. Of course, it gets underway here in the United Kingdom, the tour getting underway here. What's it going to mean for golf? Well, players like Dustin Johnson, of course, coming across to it obviously brings lots of attention to it. He's had an incredible career. One of the reasons he cited was looking after his family and looking after himself, because he doesn't want to play golf forever. When you look at his career earnings so far, he's already made $74 million in his career. It's rumoured about $125 million is what he'll get for playing in it. We've obviously seen some notable players like Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, who have denied to participate in this competition. But I think it's one of those when we look at sport and where money's coming from in different sports. We've seen it with others where more money's coming into the game, make it more attractive. Will players want to go across to that? Obviously with the financial implications. The one thing with this Live Golf Tour, of course, is the fact that the money's being backed by Saudi Arabia, and lots of comments on social media today. Obviously not happy with Dustin Johnson's decision to come across to this, because of course lots of people think that this is just Saudi Arabia using sport once again to kind of cover up human rights issues. So I think it's going to be an interesting week. We'll see how it goes. Dustin Johnson signed up for the entire series, and we'll see how it plays out. But it certainly is going to shake the bag, because of course by resigning from the PGA, it means Johnson can't participate in any future Ryder Cups, which of course is something that he has very much enjoyed playing in the past.
Absolutely. We've also got a significant decision today from the International Skating Union to raise the minimum age of competitors when it comes to senior events, going from 15 to 17. Talk us through that and what sparked that decision.
Of course. Now, you may remember back at the Winter Olympic Games, there was a big story around Kamila Valieva, who a 15-year-old Russian athlete who had been tested positive and failed a drugs test at an event prior to Beijing. The result came out during the Olympic Games. Now, one of the big issues around this, of course, is to do with young people and protecting them. There was lots of questions at the time saying, how are we protecting this young athlete? So a vote has been cast. Over 100 countries have backed the change. There was just 16 that are opposed to it. And effectively, this means now that the age is going to raise from 15 to 16 in 23, 24, and then up to 17 from 24 to 25. So effectively, they're raising this age, which basically will go towards protecting young athletes. There's a lot of pressure in sport, and when you're 15, 16, you're a young person, there's lots and lots of pressure on you, and this will go a long way to protecting these young athletes and making sure that they're in the best possible condition mentally, physically and personally to be able to compete in these competitions.
Definitely, as you say, Michael, lots of questions at the time. Good to see an answer now. Matthew, as ever, thanks so much. Michael, excuse me. Fake news concerning the monkeypox disease has already spread like wildfire across social media, and our team in the Cube has spoken to a US-based doctor that is fighting these medical myths on TikTok. Let's find out more now with Matthew in the Cube.
Well, Helena, in non-endemic countries, there are now 780 new cases of monkeypox, a viral disease similar to smallpox but much less deadly. Authorities say that the risk to global health is moderate, but this outbreak of new cases has generated misinformation and online conspiracy theories, similar to what we saw previously due to the spread of COVID-19. Well, this is Dr. Zach Rubin. He's a US-based pediatrician who has more than 160,000 followers on TikTok. Ever since the COVID-19 pandemic, Dr. Rubin has been using social media to debunk medical myths, and now he has recently turned his attention to monkeypox, posting videos similar to this one to debunk the false claim that monkeypox only affects LGBT+ citizens. While it is true that the majority of cases so far detected are among gay and bisexual men after sexual encounters, authorities have warned and reiterated that anyone, regardless of their sexual orientation, is potentially at risk of catching monkeypox if they come into close contact with a patient, their clothing or their bedding. And Dr. Rubin told my colleague Sophia why fake rumours like this one about monkeypox can be so dangerous.
My main concern is that people aren't going to take this seriously enough. When we consider that this type of disease still has a high fatality rate and can severely affect children, and it's a type of disease that I wouldn't want anybody to have because you can get very sick and have debilitating permanent scarring from it. People get sick and be sick for several weeks and take them out of work. So that's something that can affect a lot of people. If we don't take it seriously enough, it'll be much more difficult to contain. But when people are spreading this type of misinformation all over the place, it does confuse a lot of people into understanding what monkeypox is and whether or not it should be taken seriously.
Leading experts with the World Health Organization have expressed doubts that monkeypox could trigger a pandemic. But what they have said is that action is needed to curb its spread. And Helena, this action could well include measures taken by social media companies to combat the infodemic and to prevent false rumours about monkeypox from spreading online.
Well, Matthew, we know that myth-busting, destigmatising can literally save lives. So Matthew, Sophia, thank you so much. You're up to date. I'll see you soon.